Good evening, everyone. I am Joan Reeves, Chair of the English and Fine Arts Division at Northeast Alabama Community College, and I would like to welcome you to our 28th Annual Arts and Humanities Speakers Forum, an event that was created by our president, Dr. David Campbell, whom we thank for his commitment to the arts and humanities at Northeast. Students who will be getting credit for attending will need to sign into the chat room within the first 5 minutes. Before we begin, I would like to recognize two people who will assist with tonight's program. Jeff Halls, NACC English instructor, will be directing the question and answer session at the end of the program. You may write your questions in the chat room for him to ask later. Also, Don Noble, host of Alabama Public TV's Bookmark, will conduct an interview with our speaker immediately following the presentation. Now let me introduce tonight's speaker, Harrison Scott Key. Harrison Scott Key is author of two memoirs, The World's Largest Man, and congratulations, who are you again? He presently serves on the faculty at Savannah College of Art and Design and was awarded the James Thurber Prize for American Humor. After tonight's presentation, you will totally understand why he won that award. I personally enjoy his one-liners, and one of my favorites is one which I have on a Post-it note on my computer, which says, "Have a job that doesn't elicit constant groaning." Sit back and get comfortable because you are in for a real treat. Live from Savannah, Georgia, I give you Harrison Scott Key.
Well, thank you so much, Joan, and hey, everybody, I'm going to share my screen so you can see my talk here. So give me a second to pop that up, and then we will be ready to go. All right. Can y'all see that? John, Joan? Good. Yes. Great. All right, here we are. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into it. It's really great to be here. Joan and I have been talking about doing this for, I don't know, it seems like 15 years. I hadn't even written a book when you asked me to come speak about my book. And we were going to come, I don't know, 2 years ago or last year. And obviously with the polio pandemic and whatnot, things got delayed. So here we are. I'm so glad to be here with you. If you have any questions about what's behind me, Don, I'm happy to answer those too at some point. So I'm just going to get right started into it here. This is the book we're here to talk about, The World's Largest Man. You know, we can talk about the title. I would love, if I don't talk about it in my talk, Don, you can ask me about that title. My favorite thing about this, this blue ribbon up here at top, where it's as funny as well as tender, when the New York Times said that, my editor texted me and he said, "She's describing you like a really great Waffle House steak," which I thought I was appreciative of his appreciation of great food. So trigger warnings before we start. There will be some upsetting images in this presentation, some graphic language. There will be some heavy breathing. There'll be some mammal nudity. There'll be a lot of self-promotion, shattered dreams. I will be taking breaks. Thank you. I want to talk about what people said about my book. One of the great things about writing is that you get to go online to hear what crazy people think about you. People describe this book as hilarious and brilliant, humor that don't quit, a must for every man with a father, which technically is every man ever born. Technically. Sad to be finished, laugh out loud, and also cry out loud. This book is magic. My wife said better than I thought it would be. That was my wife, which I at least appreciated that she read it. But mostly people on the internet are angry. And so I want to talk about what angry people said about my book. Piece of crap. So 2 stars, which that almost hurts more than one. Like 1 star, you know that the person's just really angry inside and has a lot of their own childhood trauma. But 2 stars hurts more for some reason. Not funny. Mr. Key needs a new editor. It's actually Dr. Key, so I don't know if I'm the one who needs the editor. I did not enjoy this book at all. Come on, man. Obviously missing a comma, so you come on, man. 12 tomatoes, that's how they spelled it. I don't know out of how many. Is that out of 12? Is it out of 100? That could be good. Sad commentary on parenting. which I'm like, it's a memoir. That's why you write it. That's the whole point, is that you're, you know, if anybody out there is a writer and you're wondering what you should be writing about, you should stop all of the dumb things you're writing about and write about your childhood and your parents. Because even if they're really nice and they love you, something is wrong with them and they completely messed you up. Everybody who's listening. So just stop writing about unicorns or bass fishing or climbing Kilimanjaro and just write about your childhood and your parents. Dreadful beyond dreadful. No garbage can would accept it. That's how they spelled it. 2 exclamation points. Then the author gets married and the whole book goes downhill. When my wife read that one, she kind of agreed with it. I thought I was going to be reading a book about Andre the Giant. If you're old enough to know who that is, then you'll understand that this person is a complete idiot. So it was nice that some people did like my book. This is William Faulkner in Oxford, Mississippi. He obviously read my book. That's the hard copy. You know, a lot of people called my book a Southern book, which was very weird to me at first. I did not want to be an author of a Southern book. As I say in my second book, when you become a Southern author, then immediately, I mean, they put you in a certain, you know, a certain shelf at the bookstore, which can be very weird. To just be, you don't want to be like ghettoized in the Southern literature section. You just want to be in the literature section. You know, as I said in the second book, as soon as you're a Southern author, before you know it, you're doing like a ribbon cutting at a Cracker Barrel. And all of a sudden you just become this kind of, people just want you to write nostalgia about the South, which is not really fun. And I wanted to get out of that. But all that to say, I had to fully embrace that this was a Southern book. There's my hard copy there, and on the shelf with Flannery O'Connor and Faulkner and all of that. And once you realize that it's not a cut down to call your book a Southern book, it's actually putting it in sort of a really great category of literature, and I was really proud of that. Babies loved reading my book, which is great. One of the weird things about the internet is when you put pictures like this on the internet, people are so dumb. And one guy commented when he saw this picture, "Man, that baby can't read." Squirrels love my book. A deer did not love my book, so sadly. When I would show this picture, like north of the Mason-Dixon line, like people really gasped, like it was horrifying. Whenever I show this picture of the South, like it doesn't scare anybody because you see this kind of thing on the way to work every day. It's not unusual, but it is a signed copy, so that made this picture special. I want to read a little bit. I'm going to pause every now and then and just read you a page or two, and then continue. These are the very first lines that I wrote for this book. I wrote them at a bar here in Savannah on a Saturday afternoon. And when I wrote these lines, I knew that I was trying so hard to figure out what I should be writing about. I had never published a book. I didn't have an agent yet. I was just some cracker from this middle of nowhere school in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi. I had a lot of college degrees and absolutely zero success. And I didn't want to do anything with my life but write. And I've been trying so hard to find out who I was and what I should be saying. And it took a long time. I was 35 years old before I wrote these words, and I've been trying to write them for about 15 years. This is not like life changing what I'm going to read. It's not going to sound like, I'm not describing like, you know, being raped. I'm not going to describe the first time that I got in a street fight. But there was something in these words that really showed me that I had a book. This funny thing happens when people ask where I'm from, especially when I'm at academic conferences where people are so often from uninteresting places. Mississippi, I say. Oh, wow, they say. I can tell they've never seen a real live racist before, or at the very least, someone who's related to a racist or has seen one in the wild. It's exciting for them. They want to tweet it. They want to write a memoir about it. So they say, what's Mississippi really like? I can tell what they really want to ask is, what was it like to grow up around crazy people who believe that whatever can't be shot should be baptized? But they are afraid to ask because they are not yet sure if I am one of these people. I am, kind of, not really, sometimes. I do believe in the power of Jesus and rifles. But to keep things interesting, I also believe in the power of NPR and the scientific method. It is not easy explaining all this to educated people at cocktail parties. So instead, I tell them that it was basically just like Faulkner described it, meaning that my state is too impoverished to afford punctuation, that I have seen children go without a comma for years, that I've seen some families save their whole lives for a semicolon. So when I wrote that, I knew that I had a book. And I knew that I had a book because I had found my topic. And my topic was, how do I explain where I came from? How do I even start to do that? And if you're from the South, and I know a lot of people watching and listening are, if you've gone to other parts of the world, other parts of the United States, you find yourself having to explain Alabama and Mississippi and places like that to the people that you meet. And I realized that that would be the sort of tilt of my book. I would be trying to explain this crazy. You don't know it's crazy until you leave. Some of you know it's crazy where you grew up, but I didn't know it was crazy until I left. I didn't know the South was so weird and backwards and beautiful until I left. I didn't know that it was all those things all at once. And so that became this book. So I want to show you a picture of my family. This is them. Young people never know this is a picture of. This is not my family. This is the cast of the Dukes of Hazzard. And you can tell that they're not really crackers because they all have such good teeth. Look at that. Look at all their white, gleaming teeth. I love this show. I watched this show all the time growing up. Here's a picture of my real family. This is my father. This is Pop. This is Emmy. This is Bird. This is my sister that I completely did not even write about in the first book. But if you read the second book, you'll learn all about her. And then this is me. If you wonder who's going to write the memoir in your family, just look at the old family photos. Whoever's got that expression on their faces of this little like square-headed Frankenstein baby, that's who's going to write the memoir. Here's another picture of my childhood. What you can't see down here is I'm holding a little Confederate flag that they were selling at the Helen Keller birthplace and museum in Alabama. Why were they selling it there? I don't know. But that just shows you what a strange place Mississippi and Alabama and places like Georgia are. One of the things you learn about yourself when you look at family photos is you see patterns. And what I noticed is that as different as I felt from my father, we always had the same expression in pictures. We always were making the same face. I was clearly very unhappy, and he always looked like this, so I guess he was unhappy too. One of the things about the title that I want to talk about is that people ask me, like, who's the world's largest man? Is that you? Is that your dad? Whatever. For most of us, this is how we see our fathers. We're about this big, and they're about that big. They're always so much bigger than us in our imaginations because our first experiences with them are so often when we're obviously very young. Here's another picture. This is, again, I'm smiling and my father's smiling. The strangest thing about this picture, this was one of the first times I ever went hunting. You can see here, the clock says 3:40. It's 3:40 in the morning. So this was a pretty normal childhood. I know it was for me, was getting up at 3:30 in the morning every weekend from November to January. I thought that was completely normal. I didn't watch cartoons. I didn't go play outside. I was in the woods with a gun trying to kill dinner constantly, and it never stopped. And I thought that was what I was supposed to be doing with my life and my time. This is a great picture because my editor asked me to send him a photo for the cover that might represent my childhood. Nothing represents my childhood better than this photograph. This was my swing set here, and this is a dead animal hanging from the swing set. My father removed the big swings in the middle so we would have a place to hang the deer, and he never put them back up. That was just where we gutted the deer every time. This is an interesting photo because this is not my family. But when I left the South and you would describe hunting and describe deer camps to people who weren't from the South, this is always how they pictured deer camp. Like really like wealthy men and neckties and bow ties and nice like tweed and waxed cotton, all, ready to go kill something at the really nice deer camp. That is not what deer camp at all is like in most parts of the South. It's more like this. This picture from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that's what it was. I mean, he is still wearing a tie, which is nice. But those places that I grew up in, deer camps and fishing camps, were they were such violent places, and they smelled of blood and they smelled of death. And that was just sort of my just a normal childhood memory. I'm going to read you a little bit, just a couple of paragraphs here about my father to give you a sort of an idea of what he was like. Pop, they said, had been a beast on the grass, a true wonder in athletic contests. It was generally agreed that he would eventually play ball for Coach Vaught at Ole Miss, or at the very least wrestle bears for a living. And then during a fateful high school game versus Hernando, he broke one of the more necessary bones in his leg, and just like that, the dream died. And so, since he would not be making any game-saving sacks or game-winning scores, he set himself to making something even better. A little man, just like him, who might fill those cleats and carry the mantle, live the unlived dream. No son of his would have a choice in the matter. The gravity and density of Pop's DNA would be too much to ignore. It took him 3 marriages, but finally he got him a boy. Hot damn, Pop said that long ago day. He was excited because he'd seen a pecker. He devoted the next 18 years of his life to raising up the little thing attached to the pecker. The little thing was me. It'll make a man out of you, he was always saying. Like the time he told me to saw a deer in half. He handed me a rusty bone saw old enough to have been used by Grant siege engineers at Vicksburg and told me to run it through the dead thing's pelvis. It'll make a man out of you, boy, he said, handing me the saw. And don't be sawing through his nuts, neither. This is advice I've taken everywhere with me. Don't be sawing through an animal's nuts. That was my dad. Hey, I was born with a half brother. You know, when my father married my mom, she brought a son into the marriage, and he raised him like his own. That was Bird, and if you read the book, you'll learn all about Bird. But my father really wanted a son of his own, and that was me. And I was his lifetime project. He'd been working toward me all his life, and when I came out, that I was his 100% of his focus. He wanted to make me into all the things that he had dreamt he could be, like not just that he was like a great fisherman and a great hunter and a football coach and a football star, but he wanted me to go to college and play football in college and play baseball in college and, you know, be a game warden and open a deer camp and do all these things that he had dreamt of doing, that I very soon learned that I was not into. And that was really hard because I loved my father and I saw how much it made him sad that I loved nothing that he loved. But the one thing we both loved was the fact that I did find a wife and had what looked like a fairly normal life as I grew up. Here's a picture of my family now. I'm just kidding. This is not them. Old people never know who this picture is. Here's a picture of my wife. This was in Mississippi and taken just a few weeks before our wedding. I'm just kidding. She's the one on the right. Her hair looked like that because MacGyver was on television at the time. This was in the 1980s. She did improve. This was her on our wedding day, a beautiful woman. I do not know how I convinced this woman to marry me, but I did. And I want to read you a little bit about her and about our life together, because one of the things I found is that I couldn't just write about my childhood. I always had to come back to the present. Like, how did it affect the rest of me? And if you've ever gone to therapy, and if I was there in person, I would just ask, how many of you have gone to therapy? And for a good 2, 3, 4, 5 months, or maybe even several years. If you've gone to therapy, especially as an adult, a young adult, or an older adult, a lot of what you do and you write is very similar to therapy. And what I mean by that is, if you write nonfiction, if you're writing about your life, you have to ask really difficult questions about, like, wait, why do I do this thing? Like, let's just say that you date a lot of people and you always break up with them, or maybe you always cheat on them and go to the next one. If you do that, there's a reason that you do that. It's not just that you're a jackass. There's something in your past that makes you do that. And when you write memoir, you kind of have to go back and figure out why it is that you do that thing. And did it make you a better person? Did it make you a worse person? Is there a way you can change how you are? How much of your past can you change in your present? Man, it's trippy and it's weird. And it's a lot like what people do in therapy. I used to not think that, but I'm completely convinced of that. And I would say that writing my books has been indistinguishable from therapy, in a sense that I am always a better man when I finish a book. I always understand myself more clearly, and I understand my story and my place in the universe so much more clearly after I finish a chapter or a whole book. And sometimes you get paid a lot of money for books, and sometimes you don't get paid much at all, but it has been worth it for me just to write. I'm writing a third book right now, and I've always become a better man. So I want to write about something that happened with my wife. It was part of my realization is that I spent the first half of my life trying to escape the South and trying to escape my father. And I have spent the second half of my life, I'm 45 now, I've spent the second half of my life realizing that maybe there's a lot of that I can't escape, and I'm just going to have to live with it and make peace with it. So this little scene takes place right after I was married. I got married in my 20s, and my mother and father were at my house for Thanksgiving. So it was my new wife, Lauren, and my parents. Here we were, a family, settling into the tender holiday moment. My wife returned with a bowl of popcorn and sat down, and I noticed Pop looking at her with that old sly grin. "You know," he said to my wife, "I think your thighs may be getting bigger." When he said it, a kernel of corn lodged itself in the vestibule of my nasal cavity, preparing to repel from my nostrils and subdue the man with a flash grenade. I fully expected my wife to burst into tears and run from the room. Instead, she looked at her new father-in-law in a way that indicated he might want to shove his head up a mule's ass. "I think she looks great," Mom said. "She does," Pop said. "It's a compliment. I like big thighs." "I'm right here," she said. "Can we please stop saying thighs?" I said. "Well, haunches is the word," Pop said. "She's not a horse," I said. My wife left the room. Thanksgiving was over. Over the next few holidays, it got worse. Pop saying all sorts of things to my wife in our general area of holiday mirth. By Christmas, babies were all the rage. "Just whatever you do," Pop said, "I hope you don't breastfeed it." Alarms rang at the word breastfeed, and I quickly called in a code red. "Let's watch a bass fishing program," I suggested. "Nursing is the best thing you can do for a baby," my wife said. She was a woman of strong will with many opinions and did not yet fully understand that one does not discuss mammary glands with my father. "Please," I said, "don't." There followed a minor fracas over the merits of synthetic versus natural fluids for the infant, and it became clear that my mother had read an article sometime in the early 1970s explaining that breastfeeding was a primitive custom and that modern American mothers should instead nourish their young with Tang and Mr. Pibb. "You people are crazy," my wife said. "Ain't nothing to ruin a lady's chest like giving a baby too much titty milk," Pop said. If I'd had a gun, I would have just started shooting everyone. "Everyone stop right now," I said. I could see the disappointment in my wife's face at having married into a family where the word titty could be passed around at Christmas dinner as freely as a basket of warm crescent rolls. She looked at me and I smiled weakly. "He can't help it," I said. "He grew up on a dairy surrounded by animal teats." "Well, teats is titties," Pop said. "Stop saying titties," I said. "It's all nipples, boy." "What kind of people talk like this at Christmas dinner?" said my wife. I could tell by her look that she considered me to be one of these people. There was a moment when I got married where I realized my wife really looked at my dad and I like very similar people. And I'd worked so hard to be different from him. The way I dressed, the way I talked, the fact that I, had 4 college degrees. I worked so hard to be so different. And there I was just realizing that as a grown-up, I was more like him than I ever knew was possible. This book is about a lot of things. It's not just about hunting. It's about the South and family and farms and guns and fighting and football. The football chapter, I've just turned the football chapter into a screenplay, which we're trying to sell right now. Netflix says there's too many white people in it. Disney Plus says there's not enough. So we're trying to figure out the solution to that. It's about racism and childbirth, marriage and misogyny. It's about crack, neighbors who may smoke crack, your half cousins also being your stepbrothers. My half brother's dad was married to my dad's sister. So I'll just let you work that out on a dry erase board. Mostly this book is about fathers. And it does, so you don't have to be a hunter, you don't have to be a redneck or a hillbilly or a, superstar athlete to really get something out of this book. If you've got a dad, or if your dad's not even in the picture, this book will resonate with you. Here's a picture of my father and I taken, the dad graduated high school. It's amazing how many people just don't, they just nod when I show them the picture. That's not really us. This is us. That's Pop there. And there's me with the horrified look on my face that I often had in most of my childhood photos. Please get me out of here. This man is holding me hostage. I'm going to end with a little passage about Pop, and then we'll open it up to questions in a little bit. Let's see here. This is good. While all of human history is so concerned with its fathers, I'll never know. The mothers are so much nicer. The mothers cook us food and mail us brownies and fold our underwear. At least mine did. A mother quest, that would be nice. Where are our mothers? They are at home waiting for us to call. They made spaghetti, our favorite. So we go home and we eat the spaghetti and we let them wash our underwear, and then it's over. A mother quest sounds really nice. A cousin quest would be fun. Where are our cousins? They are down by the river and they've got beer. Or a wife quest. Moms, cousins, uncles, wives, sisters, teachers, lovers, these are all fine things to write about, but it seems like so many of us are always coming back to our fathers, who don't really excel in folding underwear. What they excel in is the art of being a real son of a bitch. Even the good ones. Sometimes the good ones are the best at being a son of a bitch. It's like being a son of a bitch is what they think fathers are supposed to be. The Bible is full of son of a bitch dads, and so is Faulkner and Star Wars and Shakespeare. You know Shakespeare's dad was a real piece of work, and so was yours probably. Our mothers, most of them, tell us who they are. They tell everything. Their hearts live on the outside of their bodies because we are their hearts. But our fathers are always aliens. We were never inside them. Or maybe it's just me. After that day in kindergarten, my relationship with Pop only got harder. He was just too large to be anything other than the Everest out before me, something to be scaled, conquered, known. I was not an untalented child, was blessed with modest intelligence and curiosity and a gift for making some people laugh, even my sister-in-law this one time. But if you have read even half the stories in this book, you know that there was one thing I could not do, and that was to love what my father loved. I quested on woods and water and fields of play and farms of work. I did. I quested like a real son of a bitch and could not find him in those places, or even myself. It took many years before I realized that I must have baffled him as much as he confused me. What must he have made of me with my love of baking and books and bow ties? What a riddling abyss I must have seemed to him when I announced that when I grew up I desired very much to be a ventriloquist. Mom made sure I got a Bozo the Clown dummy that Christmas, but the only real trick I learned was to create a sense of shame in my father. As I got older, I was no longer allowed to go grocery shopping with Mom or to help her in the kitchen because any boy who liked to cook must be a sodomite. Then, when I was 12, I overheard a conversation between my parents where Pop described some horrible thing he'd caught me doing the day before. Mom didn't want to hear it, was afraid, but he insisted that she know. You know what I found him doing? Pop said, his voice hushed at the horror of it. I don't want to know, she said. He's a good boy. He's a good son. He was in our closet, he said. Doing what? Mom said, moaning, covering her ears. Sewing a goddamn pot holder, he said. It was a Father's Day present, the pot holder was. And, you know, what's funny, that'll be my last thing to read. What's funny is that when you write about your life, you learn a lot more than you thought you knew, even after you're finished. People would come up to me on my first book tour in 2015, and I probably toured this book for 3 years. People would come up to me and they would say that they had met my father, they knew my dad, they had dated my dad or hunted with my dad. I met my father's first wife, who I'd never met before, and I had written terrible things about her in my book, and she gave me some pictures of him, and it was really awkward. And when I read that piece about the pot holder, I was sewing him a pot holder, in my memory, this was like a really kind of pathetic and sad little story about this creative little boy doing something really sweet for his dad and his dad rejecting it, right? And when I read that, my mom was in the audience and she raised her hand in the Q&A and she said, I still got that pot holder. And she pulled it out because she had heard me read this story before. She pulled it out, and of course the crowd went, ooh, you know, and like they all thought it was sweet. And she said, you made it from his favorite hunting shirt. So I had used scissors and knives and you know thread and needles, and I destroyed my father's favorite hunting shirt to make him a gift. Like, there's no better metaphor for my childhood than that. I was taking something my father loved and I was doing something else with it to show him that I could do something else. And you know what? My father never got mad at me for ruining his favorite hunting shirt. I have no memory of that whatsoever. As terrible and strange and violent as he was also a very loving man. And the people that are ugliest to us and the people that seem the worst to us are often the people that love us the most. And that is the effed up thing about human experience and human life. And what I hope you get a little bit from this talk. Here's one of my favorite pictures of Pop looking like a badass. My favorite thing about this is how the horse is also looking like a badass. Like, the horse is like, you want to fight? I'll fight you. What I love about this picture and what it represents is that this barbed wire that is just, you don't even hardly notice it at first. It's between the viewer and my father. That's always how I felt about my relationship with him. I always felt there was something in between us and I couldn't quite get to him. Here's a picture of my family now. There's a picture of my wife and children. That was actually taken a few years ago. I'll show you one in a second when I go full screen. What I love about this is our Star Wars themed Christmas card a few years ago. What I love about this is it's so obvious who's going to write the memoir in this family. If you just look at the face of the little sad baby Yoda there. But they're all getting older. They're a few years older than this now. Here's another great picture of them. I think God made me to have daughters because I love musicals and ballet and libraries and bookstores. Not that you can't have sons and love those things too, but I've still taught them to do a lot of the crazy things my father taught me to do. All three of them know how to throw a football better than any of their their boyfriends from school. All three of them have more scrapes and cuts on their knees and elbows than just about any of their friends. I've taught them how to ramp their bikes, and I let them ride bikes all over Savannah if they want to. I've taught them how to kayak with sharks and camp and do all these crazy fun things. So I want them to have adventures like I had. And I often have to lie to my wife about where we're going, and then she can just hear the stories later. Why should you get this book? There's 2 essays that aren't in the hardcover. It's smaller and lighter. It's more affordable. Great Father's Day gift. Great Mother's Day gift. It meets all travel requirements. It's indestructible. Cannot be thrown away. No garbage can will accept this book. So I highly recommend it and commend it to you, as well as my second book. The second book is sort of about the writing of the first book, but not really. It's really about trying to figure out who you are. And I know just about everybody listening is trying to figure out who you are. Why are you studying? What do you want to be when you grow up? And that's what the second book is about. Pop's in this book, but not quite as much. This book is more about my experience with my wife and my children and coworkers and college and trying to figure all those things out. And I'll stop there. Thanks, guys. I'll get some questions now from Don if he's got some.
Yes, I do. Joan, are you there? Joan, did you want?
Yes, yes, I am. I'm here.
You want questions between me and Harrison now, or do
Yes.
you want to have? All right, good. Well, Harrison, what I did in the last few days was reread both your books, so they are together in my mind, and some of these questions will drift back and forth between them.
Okay.
One of the things I, in an effort at full disclosure, I have lived in Alabama for 52 years, but I'm a New Yorker. I was a New Yorker, and I still am. And you know I always will be, because no one who moves to Alabama or Mississippi ever gets accepted and becomes a native. But what you and I have in common is we both had fathers, God knows, and I won't bore the world with mine, but you have 3 daughters, I have 2 daughters, and it has always been intriguing to me. I've always wondered, if I had a son or two, would I have been as successful a father with a son or two, with the famous historical stresses that go with that,
Yeah.
whether it goes to Oedipus or just to Harrison Scott Key. What do you think? What do you believe you would have been like as the father of sons?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think at first I thought that I would have been I didn't want sons, and I've heard other guys say that. You know, when men write memoirs, it's about finding their fathers and pursuing their fathers. And when women generally, this is not always true, when women write memoirs, it's about escaping their mothers. And so it's a pursuit, it's the father quest or the escaping the mother who's controlling and smothering, that sort of thing. And so I think your feeling and my feeling that we have about having sons and how strange that could be. I've had that thought before, and I was just talking to somebody about that the other day. But I came to a realization after my third daughter was born, and my wife and I were talking about having more kids, and we kind of thought we might want to. And I finally had come to the place where I realized I would not just be okay with a son, I kind of wanted a son, because I was already doing things with my daughters that I wasn't raising them too differently, you know? Like I mean, if they want to play, like they all have knives. I've given them knives. They know how to use knives and whittle things and cut things. And so it's not like I was just, doing sugar and spice and everything nice with my daughters. And so I realized that I had just sort of started thinking the same toxic way that I thought my dad had thought, that you have to do boys one way and girls another way. So I got over it. And I love, when I have friends with little boys, I play with them as rambunctiously and aggressively as my dad played with me. And so I would have loved to have sons.
And you think you would have been good at it. I often think, if I had a boy and that boy decided that what he loved most in the world was football and the Republican Party, and that he had no interest whatsoever in literature or music, I would have been up a tree as you and your father were, and literally each of you were up different trees at different times in the first book.
Yes, quite literally.
That's a problem that you and I never had to face, is that the son who we imagine we would shape somewhat in our image might not want to be shaped in our image at all, as you did not.
Right. Well, my children, my daughters have they have tested my masculinity as much as any son could, especially now that I've got a 14-year-old, she's almost 15, and a 12-year-old, almost 13. One thing that always frustrates me, though, if there are any moms of boys out there, moms of boys are always posting things on the internet about being a boy mom and how, like, everything's dirty and crazy and boys are wild. I'm like, they've clearly never met most of the little girls I know, who are just as dirty and wild and absolutely disgusting as any little boys I know.
Yeah. Your second book talks a good deal about being on tour and the questions that you got, obviously, on tour about your first book. And I want to ask you a question that is, in a sense, the question you were most asked, as I understand it. And this is common enough with any kind of autobiographical writing. People said, how did those people, how did they like being put in your book? Did they like the picture of them that you had put in there? And you should feel free to talk about that. But also, it occurred to me that as you were writing along about your mother, your father, your brother, your father's previous wives, and what have you, how did you feel about revealing them to the general reading public? And did you feel was there any guilt? Was there any revenge? Is it art for art's sake, no matter what? Because it isn't just their feelings that interest me, it's your feelings as you were describing them.
There's so many different ways to answer that question. I think I was just the short answer is, I didn't really think about it too much. because when I realized I had found my topic, I was going to be writing about my family. Anytime I tried to write fiction, it always seemed so much less interesting than real things that had happened to me. And I was so excited about finding my topic. I didn't care. I didn't care who it hurt. Also, when you start writing, you're so far away from publication. You don't have an agent yet. You haven't published anything. All those actual, like the actual sort of impact of somebody reading something you had written about them is so far away. It's like shooting a gun that's going to take 10 years to get to the other person. You shoot the gun and then you go about living your life. And you know, you can always change it at the last minute. I mean, I tell students, if you're writing about your family, just write it. Say everything. Get crazy. Get mean. Tell all the truth you can tell. Excuse me, because a good agent and a good editor is going to pull you back a little bit. I mean, my editors are always saying, "This is kind of mean here. Do you want to say it that way?" And I'm like, "No, you're right. It'll be better if I take that out." There's a great quote back here. I'm going to read this to you because it's completely relevant to your question. I just read this and I put it up on my shelf. This was in the New Yorker. I read this earlier this week. Anthony Lane, the film reviewer, one of my favorite writers alive. Love Anthony Lane, so funny. But he was reviewing a biography of Tom Stoppard, the great playwright. But this quote is not about that, but it's about the question you asked. When existence is no laughing matter, is it cool or cruel of a creative artist to persist in the devising of a complex entertainment, parts of which may be wrought from those same woes? Or is it, on the contrary, a question of honor, even of courage, to remain, as Henry James says, one of the people on whom nothing is lost? So the question is, how sort of, is it ethical to write about your family in that way? What else can you do but use the experiences of your life? So what I tell students is, if you write funny, you can get away with a lot. And if you write with love, you can get away with a lot. If you're going to compliment, if you're going to say something, funny and kind of cutting about your, ex-wife's mom, then compliment her cooking too. If you're going to talk about her mustache, talk about her really great car. Find a way to make people that you're making look bad also kind of look good, and make people that you're making look good kind of maybe look a little bad. I've made a very concerted effort. People were so complimentary of my wife after the first book. They would say, "Oh, she's such a saint. I can't believe she married you. What a lucky man you are." And I'm like, she can be a real jackass sometimes. Maybe I have hidden that from my readers. And so in my second book, I made sure to point out things about my wife that are very true and very real, and it humanized her a little bit and made her look a little bit less like a saint. I knew that she wouldn't care. There are only two people I don't want to upset with my books: my wife and my mom. And I usually let them read both of them read what I'm going to write before I publish it. Not always, but sometimes, most of the time.
As I was reading along, and sometimes I can't tell whether a given bit is in the first book or the second book, but there is a moment that you describe after 10 years of struggle, and I would have given up way ahead of that. I'm not getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to some coffee house for 2 hours in the dark of winter. That was really heroic. But when you finally, there's a moment when, as you describe it, as I remember it, you found your voice. And now, reading the rest of the second book and hearing you speak, it seems to me that the two questions. One, is it really your voice that you found, or is it your material that you found? And the other thing is, and I want to know this, what in the world had you been writing unsuccessfully for 9.5 years?
The first question, I think the question of voice is a very confusing thing for a young writer. What does it mean? There are whole books written about what does this word mean. I think it's the marriage of subject and style. That's what I call voice. So I had found my subject, which was writing about my life, and especially with the first book, writing about my father. This was going to be, and not just my father, but writing about the South as a sort of metonymy for my father. Once I figured that out. That's my subject. The style is, how do I write about it? And my style is obviously, it's very funny. It's I'll kind of sucker punch you with some emotion. It just like slides right in there. And so when I figured out I was going to be writing about that and in that way, that's what I mean by finding my voice. It's like when you hear a singer, I don't watch it anymore, but I used to love watching American Idol. And when I would watch American Idol or any other of these singing competitions, people with good voices, they can sing all these songs and it just doesn't click. And then they find the right kind of song and it's like, oh my gosh, you're finding your voice. And it's exactly the same way, finding those two things. The second question, what had I been writing for the 10 or 15 years before I finally found it? I have a PhD in playwriting. That was my first or second graduate degree. And so I wrote a lot of plays and I wrote a lot of fiction and short stories. I tried to write funny essays and they were always surface level. I could never figure out, like, if you and I went and had a beer, I feel like you would make me laugh. You seem like a smart, funny guy. And I feel like I would make you laugh. And it would happen naturally, forcing that natural comedy and humor to happen at 5 a.m. at a coffee shop or, on an airplane when you're trying to get some writing done, forcing that kind of comedy to happen when you're not in front of anybody else and you're not in a good mood. That's what took me 10 to 15 years. I could be funny all day long in front of people, but I could not be funny when I was trying to type the crap that's in here. And so short-circuiting that process and figuring out how to sort of Jedi mind trick myself into being the funny guy that I naturally was is what took so long.
Humor. If we attempted to define it and explain it, we would murder by dissecting, as people always do. You cannot explain why things are funny. It just makes them not funny at all, generally. But I do want, since you are now a prize-winning humorist, I'd like to hear some thoughts about the humorists who matter to you and humor and its place in Southern Lit. I have done some work on this myself over time, and my favorite of the living are Roy Blunt and George Singleton, and I thought that Lawrence King was wonderful. Barry Hanna could be funny. Louis Grizzard. But Southern literature, generally speaking, isn't. It's an awful lot of darkness, an awful lot of killing and racism and unfunny stuff. So, in this sense, do you have favorites? Do you have models? Do you have an idea about how you make things funny? You made sitting in the cold in the dark funny. You made being hit with a leather strap funny. I mean, there's a lot, well, sometimes, but who do you like, and how do you think about humor as you are very self-consciously creating it?
Well, I don't always, people can call me a humorist, and I've been called that many, many times. And Calvin Trillin said that calling yourself a humorist is like being a professional baseball player and calling yourself an excellent third baseman. So, I would prefer to call myself just a funny writer. I'm a writer who's going to write funny no matter what I write about. Humorist sometimes kind of feels like it puts you in the, you write casuals for the New Yorker or something back in the 1960s. But I don't mind being called that at all. So who do I like? Well, my favorite writers are funny, and they are funny and smart at the same time. They are funny. They're not just funny. So I mentioned Anthony Lane, who writes mostly movie reviews for the New Yorker and has for almost 30 years now. Intellect and a man who knows more about movies than you do. So you're leaving with a real insight as to what he thinks about the film, but you're laughing while you're doing it. That's the kind of funny writer I like. Flannery O'Connor, the first 20 times you read her, you're like, she's not funny. I mean, she's weird and macabre and writing about all these, weird religious things. And then after a while, after life, beats your ass a little bit, you realize, oh, this is really funny. Like, really funny things are happening, even though there's racism or violence also happening. It feels weird for readers to laugh when something really tragic or dangerous is happening. And so I love writers like that. William Faulkner has many funny sentences and paragraphs in his work. Most of the great serious works of art in human history have comedy or irony somewhere in them. Sometimes it's hidden. Even a movie like Schindler's List has funny moments. There are moments where you laugh in that film. When he is trying out secretaries, and there's the unattractive secretaries who type really well, he ends up hiring the really beautiful one who can't even type at all. That moment is dealt with in a very comic way, and that's very intentional. So I don't see comedy as something that sort of set off to the side for when you're sitting on the toilet or sitting on a plane. I really feel like comedy is just how I interact with the world. And if you're a funny person, you're probably going to write funny. George Saunders is another great, funny, serious writer that I really love. I put Anthony Lane and George Saunders and Flannery O'Connor. Anthony and George are both alive. I love Charles Portis. I don't know if anybody listening knows the work of Charles Portis. He wrote True Grit. He wrote two very funny novels, Norwood and Dog of the South. And he passed away, I think, 3 years ago. I think, for my money, he was the funniest American writer of the last 100 years, by far.
And Gringos.
Oh, I love Gringos. That's the best one.
This is maybe a more abstract question. The cost of your art over the 15 years when it wasn't going very well, the price that, in a sense, well, most directly your wife and ultimately your children and your standard of living, the price that had to be paid in your dedication to being a successful writer was really an enormous price. And now, of course, there has been a payoff. I mean, you are now, congratulations, a famous person. But how, as this was going along, in your mind, how did you balance the enormous sacrifice of time and energy that had to go into what was going to be art with what was lacking, or what your absence from, as your wife has put it eloquently in the second book, the time you weren't home, or the time when you were distracted while you were home. Yeah. Art and family life seem to be like a real difficult balance, or at least they seem to have been for you.
Yes, they were, and they are. Well, there are a lot of ways to answer that question. I think, gosh, it's such a complicated question.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I don't know if those who are watching saw my TED Talk. It's called "The Funny Thing About the American Dream." That answers this question better than how I can answer it now. Google Harrison Scott Key TED Talk. It's 12 minutes. I explain how very almost impossible it is to have this thing we call the American dream. By that I mean, like, how do you balance your ambition with all the things that make you normal, like a marriage and children and a mortgage and things like that. It's not unusual. I mean, it is unusual when a very successful artist stays married. It's always so weird when you meet a famous actor who's been married for more than 10 years, or who married somebody before they hit it big, right? That's not just because you get rich and famous and you want to start dating a supermodel or want to start dating, somebody like that. It's because the pressures of making art and the focus that it takes away from your family destroys marriages. It turns people into alcoholics and drug addicts. And most importantly, it turns people into selfish asswipes. I mean, that's just what happens. The way I was able to sort of get through that period was that I really didn't have friends. my wife and children became my friends. Like, that was who I spent time with. So when I wasn't writing or at work, I was at home. I had no friends at all. So that was one solution. If I'd had friends, I probably wouldn't have a wife right now, because I'd have been spending time with them and not her. And so I didn't have hobbies. I was grossly overweight. I had no money and I had no friends. That's how I was able to accomplish it. That sounds really funny and sad, but it's very true. Because I focused on my work. I knew I had to have a day job at the university for health insurance and stability and a mortgage. And I knew that I wanted to have a family and be a good father and a good husband. So I had to spend time on cultivating those relationships. So I really didn't do anything else. And I was very fortunate and I was also really unhealthy. I mean, I probably weighed 250 pounds because I sat all day. And right around the time that my first book got published, I felt things changing in my life, and I felt it was time to make some big changes. My father passed away too, and that was sort of a big deal. And trying to figure out, when your dad dies and you're writing a book about him, that's weird, especially when it's a funny book. But my life was changing. I started using a standing desk. I'm standing up right now while I'm doing this. This is my desk where I work. I started riding my bike. I started actively pursuing friendships with other guys that had been trying to be my friend for many years. I started writing a lot less. I still write way more than most people, but I no longer would write until noon on Saturday, and from noon until nighttime on Sunday. It was just in the mornings to make time for my family. So learning how to pivot and make those changes. Like right now, I have little kids. I need to be present for them, but I'm going to write for an hour a day, even if it's just an hour. And so you have to give up a lot to have some things. And I gave up a heck of a lot in my late 20s and in my 30s so I could be where I am today.
Well, I have never read in any book about a man who went to the doctor and was told he needed to work on his core. But I can see now that you have worked on your core, that
yes.
that things are stronger in your midsection.
Yeah, so here's my standing desk. You can see it. Here it is. Well, that's actually why I started using a standing desk. I was like, well, I got to stand up. If I'm not going to be doing manual labor, I at least need to be standing while I'm writing. And then I started riding my bike to work, and that helped too.
I was amused. I had been acquainted with Pat Conroy for years and years. Often a very funny man, especially in his nonfiction. He was very funny. And then along came your mother attending your readings in the way that the Colonel Santini attended Pat Conroy's readings. You may or may not know about that, but his father would go to the readings and sit next to him and insist on signing the books and tell everyone who appeared, I am the seed, I am the fountainhead for all of this. And your mother did something parallel to that at your readings. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah. So I talk about this in the second book. She would show up to my readings, and I mean, she was having the time of her life because she was getting to travel. She was seeing all these old friends. It was very sweet ultimately because it was her giving her blessing for this to be there. Of course, she would always call me by my childhood nickname, which is my middle name, which is Scott. So I went by Scott as a boy because Harrison was, too sort of breathy and feminine for my hillbilly dad, even though he'd named me that. So as soon as I started writing, when I was like maybe 21, I started using my full name, Harrison Scott Key. It just sounded famous. Francis Scott Key. It just sounded like I should be a judge or something, And so I started using the whole name. And then whenever I would go to a new college somewhere, people would just call me Harrison, and I didn't correct them. So that's how I started going by Harrison. It just sounded more like a writer. And so my mom would call me Scott there sitting at the book signing table. She'd be like, oh, y'all come up here and meet Scott. And people are like, who's Scott? And she's like, this is Scott. And they're like, who is he? And I was like, Mom, stop. Like, what are you doing? I'm a grown man. I have a wife and children. You're like, you're assaulting me emotionally in front of all these 100 people were ready to sign books. And then I didn't realize that she was really a part of the act. I mean, she was being funny, and the only person that was upset by her behavior was me. Everybody else was dying laughing, and I was like, oh my gosh, my mom she's a part of this act. So we just started doing that everywhere we went, and she loved it. She still loves to do that.
Yeah. Your second book is a lot about the book tour, and the most famous utterance about the book tour is that the most terrible thing in the world that can happen to a writer is if his publisher sends him on a book tour, except for if his publisher does not send him on a book tour. And there isn't time for, I recommend that the first 50 or 80 pages of the second book is about book tour, and it's a riot. But in a condensed version, speak about the horrors of the book tour. And also, it's something that I'm always curious about is, does it sell books? Does it work? Does it do what the publisher and the author think they want done?
I don't know if a book tour works or not. I mean, it can. It's sort of a springboard to something else. Like for me, I love to perform, and I did an event with Roy Blunt. I've done several events with Roy and Calvin Trillin where it was like a live kind of radio show, Prairie Home Companion type thing. I love that kind of thing, and with my theater background and my comedy background. So it was obvious that I was going to go on a big tour and do this. Not just as a sort of victory lap you really should only go on a book tour in any town where you've ever lived, or you've ever gone to college, or your mom has ever lived. I mean, those are the places you go, because that's why people come. But I went to way more town. I went to about 150 cities, and I wanted the experience. I wanted the memory. I took my children. I would take my wife. I would take my mom. I'd bring my best friend, Mark. So I wanted that whole experience. Does it sell books? It did sell a lot. We would always sell a lot of copies whenever we would go somewhere. Cost benefit analysis, not sure it's effective, but the benefit for me being the fun and the connection with people and the sort of having that part of it was absolutely worth it. And the thing is that you meet people when you go out on the road. I've met more editors that I've published with than I ever would have had I not gone. I've made more friends. I have seen the impact of my stories in other people's lives by hearing them talk about my books at the book signing table, which has a part in sort of propelling me to the next book and giving me ideas and giving me encouragement. I did an event at Octavia Books in New Orleans. I've done several events there. And I did one, and it was very small. There were maybe, 15 people there, and it was kind of quiet, and my wife and kids were there, and I was kind of embarrassed that more people hadn't come. The previous time I'd gone there, like 50 people were there. Somebody came up to me at the end, and a lady I didn't recognize, and she goes, I just thought your presentation was great. We just happened to be in the bookstore when you started talking, and we sat down, and it was great, and would you sign my book? And she said, have you ever thought about, turning this into a show or anything? And I was like, I don't know. I'm just too busy with everything else, but that would be fun. So she finds me on the internet, emails me again a few months later, and she's like, we met at this bookstore. She goes, anyway, I'm a movie producer, and I would love for you to write a screenplay version of this. And now she's the producer of the film, and she's the one who's pitching it to Netflix and Disney and Amazon and Hulu and all of these places. So that's the number one reason to go on a book tour. You might meet a producer for the screenplay version of your memoir.
Good advice. I have just a couple more questions. Like all writers, you do or do not read your reviews, and like all writers, you do or you are not horribly affected by them, either positively or negatively. Tell us about your opinion on book reviews.
Oh, read them all, man. Just read them all. Like, you can act really arrogant and, self-assured. I'm sure that if I got to some point in my career where I mean, I'm not so famous that people are really cruel and hateful to me on the internet like they are to people like Kanye West or Ted Cruz or whoever. I mean, I'm sure that if I was actually really famous and well known nationally, it would be really hard to read things about myself. But I'm at a point now where I love to read reviews. You know, the negative ones are really hard to read. Obviously, you saw them at the beginning of the presentation. If you go on YouTube and you Google my name, you'll see the book trailer for the second book where I talk a lot about the reviews, and that's really funny. You know, comedy is tragedy plus time. Everybody knows that. You take a sad thing and let it sit for a little bit, like a tea bag and a cup of hot water, and eventually it turns into something beautiful and delicious. And reading bad reviews of your books is that way. You know, you read those bad reviews in the first month your book comes out, and you want to go to people's houses with a can of gasoline and a rifle. And you realize after a while that, well, those people just had something up their butt, or they were just in a bad mood, or, you know, if 99 people are loving the book and 2 aren't, like, well, forget about it. But you can also learn from that. I mean, if you see the same theme popping up in negative reviews, that's good for you to know. It's good for you to know because it might tell you that there's a certain type of reader who's not your audience, and you should just be aware of that. Or, well, maybe there's something you can do to enchant that reader too that you're not doing. And so I firmly believe in feedback on all levels.
Your second book, book reviewers everywhere are pleased, but your second book is largely about the making of your first book. So I have to ask.
Here we go.
Yeah. I trust that your third book is not about the making of the second book.
No, it is not. It is about a topic that is, I won't say anything about it other than it's a topic that is addressed in very small ways in both books, like a little bit of an Easter egg that I'm going to make the whole topic of this third book.
Let me close with this one little bit, and that is, or I mean, other people can have other questions, but for our dialogue, the first book ends with the word love, and the second book almost ends with the word love. There is a page or two after you declare that the thing that makes you really alive, that makes you really a man, the thing that is not going out into the woods and killing things, but finally love. And I think that's right. I think that is what people do take away. But I'd love to hear you I'd love to hear you talk for a moment about how it is that is the overarching lesson of a book that has in it a whole lot of pain and killing of animals and distress between father and son.
Well, you know, love is the strongest force in the universe, and it's a paradox. How do you, especially, you know, everybody comes from a place that they're a little embarrassed of. Even the, you know, elite, incredibly wealthy people are a little embarrassed of that, or how they were raised, or how their parents acted. Everybody's a little ashamed of where they're from. And we're also a little proud of it too. Maybe it made you, you know, you grew up on the mean streets of Brooklyn. Well, it made you tough, right? Or, you know, your mother abandoned your family when you were 6 and taught you self-reliance, maybe. We're all a little bit ashamed and a little bit proud of where we're from. People from the South, just like everywhere else. But, you know, the South gets, we take the licks for a lot of the nation in the South for reasons that are much deserved and earned. I like to tell people that everything beautiful and everything ugly about America was perfected in the South. Whether it's literature or music or racism or politics, we do it better and worse than everybody else in America. And all that to say that when you're looking at your childhood, or you're looking at the place you're from, your family, place you grew up, you have to figure out, because everybody hates something about their past. How do you salvage the beautiful parts of your past and eject and jettison the ugly parts? How do you move into the next generation without carrying all that terrible baggage? How do you do it? And the way you do it is through forgiveness, through consciousness and awareness and forgiveness and love. That's how you do it. That's how you resurrect the best of the dead things from the past and give them to your children. And you keep dead the things that need to stay dead. Maybe that's alcoholism. Maybe it's misogyny. Maybe it's overzealousness about some particular topic or politics or religion. Whatever things need to die, some things do need to die in everybody's past, and a lot needs to be kept alive and given to your children and your grandchildren. And the only way to do that is with love. And that's the answer for how do you come to terms with a father who, how do I come to terms with a father who beat me? Well, he did a lot of things that were really amazing and beautiful, and that other men my age wish their fathers had done for them. You can't, if you throw it all away, then you throw away the love too. We're all imperfect creatures. So that's why, if people don't read anything else in the book, they should read the football chapter and read the last chapter, because man, that last chapter will make you bawl like a baby. It is so sad and sweet, and I can't read it. If I read it right now, I would just be crying, because it just makes me think of my dad all over again. And we're always that little kid sort of waiting for your parents to pick you up or do something with you. All of us are that person. So I highly commend the last chapter to anybody listening.
I recommend the last chapter and all the ones before it. They're both really lovely books.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joan, what is your pleasure here?
Now Jeff will ask a few of the questions that we have.
Sure.
And we'll probably try to, if it's okay with everybody, we'll run this for about 15 minutes. That'll put us right at 7:30 or 6:30 Eastern time. Central time, if everybody's good with that.
Fine with me.
All right, Jeff, you have the floor.
All right, Joan, can you hear me? Awesome. Well, I have to say, this is one of the best speakers forums we've ever had. And it's evidenced in the chat box because our students are blowing up tons of questions. They have some really good things that they are curious about. So I'll start with Joshua's question. And he asks, he says, writing must be both energizing and exhausting. So what do you think about that, Harrison? And how do you balance those out?
It's very much energizing and exhausting. It's just like playing a sport or exercising. If you love to exercise, you love to run, energizing and exhausting, right? I mean, if it's exactly the same way. I will say that right now it's about 80% exhausting and 20% exhilarating. That seems to be a pretty good balance for most riders. And when it's going well, there's no drug like it in the world. It makes me so much more pleasant, and it makes me kind and happy. I talk to little birds that I see in the trees, and I'm sweet to my children. I love when I write a line or a paragraph or an essay is like coming together and I finally figured it out. There's no high like that in the world. And it would be something similar to throwing a touchdown pass or running a marathon. You can really let the endorphins go wild inside of you. But it is hard, and you have to have discipline. It's not for the faint of heart. And I tell people, if they're babies or sissies or titty babies, don't write, man. You gotta be a badass to do it, because man, it is exhausting. It's real easy to write something terrible. No, it's hard to write something terrible, and it's even harder to make it good. So whatever. I don't have time for people who are too lazy to be amazing.
Well, Rachel asks this question: how do you deal with writer's block, which is something we all struggle with, especially sometimes students. How do you deal with writer's block, and is your wife your muse?
I deal with writer's block by drinking and drugs. Just kidding. I don't know what writer's block is. I think that's just people saying it's hard. I don't talk about, I don't even know what that is. It's like, it's hard, but you just have to figure it out. It just means that you have to sort of go at your story with in jujitsu, in boxing, they just like hit you, right? You're just like pounding each other's faces. But in jujitsu, you're coming at the problem in a different way. You're using people's energy against them. You're like sliding, when they go this way, you go that way, and that's how you win. And when you get stuck in a piece, that's just what you got to do. You've conceived of the problem in the wrong way. If you get to a passage and you don't know how to proceed, like let's just say that this is a little timeline of writing, and you're writing your story and you're going along, and then you get here and you get stuck. The problem is not here. It's always back here somewhere. So you just got to go back and rethink about it. I go for walks. I will assault the store. I will go read other books that are similar, and I'll try to get ideas from those other books. I do not stop or slow down. Every now and then, I'll take a break from writing to try and let my mind work on it. Sleeping does wonders for writer's block, but at the end of the day, you just got to think your way out of a hole. And usually, if you're trying to get through the door right there, you got to back up. There's a door somewhere else that you missed. Is my wife my muse? Sort of. She is I am a great straight man to her funny man. And if you read my books, she's always the one with the better punchlines in the dialogue. She's always kind of looking at me like, I'm not sure what you're doing is right. Or, she's always sort of cutting me down to size like a lot of wives do for husbands. So in that sense, she is kind of my muse in the sense that she has helped me realize that I am funniest when I am the idiot in the story. But I don't really have a Beatrice, like Dante did. I'm just, I love looking in the mirror long and hard at myself. I love the way I look, and I love the way I talk. And I think I'm my own muse. I guess that's what I'm saying. I'm just kidding. I don't know. I don't really have a muse, I guess.
Well, Kyle wants to know who encouraged you to write. Could have been early on in your life, and at what age did you really enjoy it? You knew that you just wanted to be a writer someday.
I don't think she should. If it's a she, should definitely read this book because I talk a lot about that. Nobody really ever encouraged me to be a writer. I think people just didn't stop me, and that's still very nice of them. As crazy as it was for a career choice, my parents never once told me it was a dumb move. They believed that I was intelligent and that I could do anything that I tried to do. And even though I had proved my father that I could not do any of the things that he wanted me to do as a child, they believed I could do it. And so when I told them I wanted to be a writer, they didn't blink twice about it. I never had like a special teacher that encouraged me. The way I became a writer is ultimately, I loved writing letters. I wrote letters to my grandparents, my cousins, pen pals, people I met at summer camp. The first thing I typed was a secret admirer letter to a girl in my school when I was in the 5th grade and she was in the 4th grade. And I could do things with words in writing that I could not do in person. I could make them just right. I could make them when I talk in person, it's like I'm carrying a big boulder and I'm just hitting people over the head with it. But when I write, it's like I'm making a sword. I can make this thing that's sharp and perfect and say exactly what I want. Not that I'm trying to kill people that I'm talking to, so maybe that's a bad metaphor. You get the idea. I could get so precise when I would write. So I was always writing. I loved writing assignments in school. I did not major in English because I thought that only like girls who read Jane Austen did that. I did not know that a guy could major in English. I wrote for the school paper because I just loved being funny in words and making people laugh. And I was an actor and I did comedy. And I realized that there were no great monologues for auditions back in the 90s because we didn't have the internet and the way we currently have it. You couldn't just find an audition monologue. So I would write my own monologues for auditions. And my monologues always ended up being just funny stories about my family. And that's all this is. This is just a bunch of funny monologues about my family where I took all the stage directions out. So when I realized, oh, all of my funny stories about my family are just, I could just write those down and get them perfect. And so that's how I began writing. It was a very circuitous way to get to a writing profession. I thought I was a comedian for a long time, and I guess I am. I'm just a different kind.
Well, we have several questions coming in about the publishing process. And I noticed Aisha said briefly, we know you can't, take forever to explain, but tell us a little bit about how that works. If you've written something, how do you get it published and how does all that work?
It is. Also answer that question thoroughly in the second book. It's hard. It's as hard as how do you get your album recorded and put on the radio or put on YouTube. It's just as hard. The question becomes, you have to sort of work on it's a sort of two-pronged approach, maybe three. All right, one prong is, what are you supposed to be writing about? Okay, how are you supposed to be writing? And then who do you need to know? What worlds do you need to be in? And if you remember from earlier in the talk, these two things sort of make your voice, right? Like, what are you writing about and how? The only way you figure out what to write about is by writing. The only way you figure out how is by reading, and then doing some more writing. And this other piece over here is you go to a school that has talks like this. You go to get your graduate degree. You write for the literary magazine, or you edit for the literary magazine at your college. You go to writing festivals and book festivals, and you meet writers, and you start to learn that there's this whole network of people, and they're looking for stories, and they're looking for writers. Publishers make a lot of money. Most of the money they make are for books like To Kill a Mockingbird, Harry Potter, anything Stephen King writes. That's how they make money. They make so much money off those books. They take that big bucket of money and they give little bits of it to writers like me. They're like, because they're trying to just fund world civilization. So they have all this money that they make from all these big books that everybody has to read in school, and they'll buy this book, they'll buy that book, and one of those books, maybe one out of every 100, takes off just like Harry Potter or Stephen King book, and it starts to create more money in the bucket for other writers. And you realize there's a whole network of people out there looking for writers and looking for talent. You have to meet people in magazines. You have to publish at magazines online that nobody's ever heard of. You have to do that at first. Just like if you want to play on the professional, if you want to play at the Masters, you don't start at the Masters. You have to start playing at the local, hillbilly country club where it costs $20 to play. And you have to play there and get good there. And then you go on up to the slightly better golf course. It's a long and crazy road, and it's a pilgrim journey, and it takes a long time. Most debut authors, their first books come out, the average age is about 39. So you're studying when you're 20 years old to write books, maybe when you're 25, but the average age is 39 or 40. It's a long road, so you have to have fun on the way, which is why you need friends and family and a swimming pool and a couple of hobbies and a comfortable bed. It's going to take a while, but you just got to do those three things: write a lot, read a lot, and then meet people who are in the business. And they'll tell you if they need stories. They'll tell you where to publish. You just have to do all those things all the time. And you can do all three of those things on the internet too, which is great.
That's a great response. I know a lot of people were asking kind of that same question. This question comes from JR. I listened to The World's Largest Man on Audible, and listening to the book was especially meaningful because you were the reader. What was that experience like, and why did you not read your second memoir for Audible?
Well, the reason I'll answer the second question first, and I'm sad I didn't. I was just too busy. It's like a 2-week commitment to record an audiobook, and classes had just started, and I just couldn't do it. And that was a bummer. The guy who did it was great, but he wasn't Southern, and he messed up a lot of the names, and it's just how it shakes out. I'm definitely recording my third audiobook. It was really fun. to record. It was arduous. I had to sit in a little booth. It happened in Connecticut, and I sat in this little booth with a microphone and a Kindle, and I had a producer right outside of the booth who would tell me, read that one again. You coughed. I heard some mouth sounds there. Go back and do that again. I would read for about 6 to 8 hours every day, doing retakes, and it took about 2 weeks to do it. So it was a lot of work. But the best part of it, aside from just having an audiobook, which is so cool that I have an audiobook, is the best part is learning that part of the business and how it works and having that appreciation for people who do that. And also, I had not read the entire book since I had finished it and given it to my editor. So I was sort of encountering all of these characters again. And when you write a book about your father who's just passed away and you go on tour and you do an audiobook, it's like you're on a road trip with your dad. It's sort of dreamy. And so to sit in this booth, I would just start crying in the booth when I'm trying to read like a funny story, because I felt like my father was still alive in these pages. And that was so special to me to discover that in this tiny little booth in Connecticut. And so I was very grateful for that. And it's also so weird to listen to it. It takes a lot of work to record an audiobook. I didn't know how funny to be. Nobody's laughing because you're in there by yourself. That was an interesting experience, but I look forward to doing it again.
Well, have you already, or are you planning on writing a book about 2020 and the pandemic? Because I think you would probably have some fun stories to share about sheltering in place with your family.
Yeah, the pandemic is definitely making an appearance in the third book. That's all I'll say about that. But yes, I'll be writing about that. I have been writing furiously during this entire year. I finished the screenplay in June, July, and I have been working on this book furiously, getting up, working at night. I never used to write at night. I'm writing at night now. Everybody goes to bed, and I just sit in my driveway and write. It's so great. So yeah, I'm just writing nonstop. I'm hoping to be done with this book by the end of the year.
All right, and I think we have time for maybe one more. This is a question from Megan. Kind of touched on this and probably do your second book as well, but how did your writing approach change after your first book was published?
Well, you have more confidence, which is good. Like, that's one difference between me and all the young writers listening. When I sit down, I have an ego the size of a Chevrolet truck, right? Like, you got to have that to take all the criticism. The more successful you get, the more people criticize you for a living. Reviewers, your agent, your editor, everybody's criticizing you. So the bigger you get, the more beats and hits you take. So you have to have a pretty big ego to just take all of that. You have to have a lot of confidence. So when I sit down, like, there are a lot of people here who want to write, and they sit down, they're like, who cares about this? Who's going to care? When I sit down, like, I kind of know people are going to care, and that helps. I don't have to jump over that pit. I don't have to fight that dragon every time. Now, it could still be really bad, but at least I've gotten over it. So I know that so after writing my first book, I knew that people cared. I knew I had an audience. I knew that I belonged. I felt like I finally belonged. That gave me confidence to just sort of go nuts and write whatever I wanted. That was awesome. You get that when you get to where I am, you get that. And that's the best part of having success, is having so much more confidence. The downside is that when I was nearing that success with finding an agent and getting the book published, I was on fire for Jesus, man. I was like, I knew that I was manifesting the best of all possible worlds. I was writing. The writing was so good. I was hungry. Like the rookie quarterback. I was hungry to prove myself. And that hunger is so important and gives you such an edge. And so after you have success, you kind of lose that it's the flip side of the confidence. And so I have found with this third book, things I thought were good were not as good as I thought. And I'd have my agent or my editor saying, I don't know about this. Maybe scrap this chapter. I'm like, scrap the chapter? I worked on it for 2 months. And realizing that my confidence was also getting the better of me too. That it was good to have confidence, but you need to take a few punches so that you can get back in the game. Like Seabiscuit in the movie. Seabiscuit was really fast, but if he was out in front, he would never win, right? He had to have somebody kind of in front of him, teasing him a little bit to make him speed up. And I really need that too. So I got more confident, but I got a little bit lazy after my success. And I had to really bear down and find and do something new. I had to write sentences in a new way. People could tell where my punchlines were going to come all of a sudden because my sentences have a similar kind of rhythm. So I had to completely scrap that. I found that I was writing a series of threes. I was writing a not funny thing, and then a funny thing all in a row. And so for my third book, I'm like, you know what? No threes. I'm going to do 2 things or 4, but no threes. So I would set these rules to challenge myself to be different. So yes, it's very different. It's just so cool though. It's so cool to do a talk like this, that people care. I go to my bookstore down here and they have books for me to sign. Everybody was waiting in line to get into E-Shaver Books down here in downtown Savannah. It's about 4 blocks away. And there was a line to get in because of their COVID protocols. And I texted the bookstore owner and I was like, I'm here because she had some books for me to sign. So she opens the door and I got to go around all these people and she was like, it's an author. And all these people were like, ooh, an author. And I signed the books and they bought some. That is so cool. And I never had that before. So I'm so happy that that's my life now. And my wife rolls her eyes and my kids think it's awesome and my friends think it's kind of funny. But I love that I get that now. That gives me so much hope and excitement to do the next project, to stay here, to stay what I'm doing what I'm doing.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Harrison. All of our students are just coming on the chat, thanking you for inspiring them and making them laugh. And they're all going to buy your books. So that's a plus too. That's what you wanted to hear.
Thank you. That's what I want to hear.
Joan, I'll turn it over back to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we need to make a deal here, Harrison. You need to sign a bunch of your books and sell them to me, send them to me, and I will sell them to my students. I promise you they will buy them because they would love to have signed copies.
Well, let's talk about that offline. I'd love to.
Okay. We will have that conversation for sure.
Great.
Thank you to everyone who showed up tonight and for this very enjoyable speakers forum. To be honest with you, I'm just relieved that we didn't have any major technical problems. And that's thanks in a large part to Jared Blackwell. So Jared, thank you so much for your part in all of this. And Jeff, thank you for helping me with everything you've helped me with as well.
Thank you.
You've been my rock through much of this. Every time I'd almost have a breakdown, you'd say, don't worry, we got this, we can fix this. And Don, always thanks to you for showing up and helping us. Your questions are always so insightful and bring about a really good dialogue, and I appreciate it more than I can ever say. And it makes me really proud that I can say that I introduced another writer to you that you did not know about, because that's always been your job to introduce writers to me. I had never read Pat Conroy until Don told me to read him, and then I became a big fan, of course. And of course, Harrison, thank you so much. I'm so glad we finally made this happen.
Me too.
You did a great job, and my students love you. And hopefully we can do this again sometime, and maybe in person.
Would love to do this again. Don, everybody, y'all were so great. I'd love to do. I want to see y'all. Can I just say I love the way y'all talk. You know, I don't get to do book talks where I hear people that sound like my people, so I appreciate that. And I'd love to see y'all in real life, maybe next year or a year after that, maybe when Beth Ann or somebody I know is going to be there. It'd be so much fun. Y'all were so kind to me, and the students had great questions. Don, you had great questions. Thanks so much, guys.
All right. Thank you so much. And Harrison, I will be giving you a call so we can talk about books.
Let's talk.
Okay.
Good.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.